The peach, the apple, and the blackberry. A dispute arose once between a peach and an apple as to which was the fairer fruit of the two. They were so loud in their wrangling that a blackberry from the next hedge overheard them. "Come," said the blackberry, who thought herself quite fine, "also we are friends and all fair. Pray let us have no quarrels amongst ourselves." Lesson: Know thyself. Jupiter's lottery. Jupiter, in order to please mankind, directed Mercury to give notice that he had established a lottery, in which there were no blanks, and that amongst a variety of other valuable chances, wisdom was the highest prize. It was Jupiter's command that in this lottery some of the gods should also become adventurers. The tickets being disposed of, and the wheels placed, Mercury was employed to preside at the drawing. It happened that the best prize fell to Minerva, upon which a general murmur ran through the assembly, and hints were thrown out that Jupiter had used some unfair practices to secure this desirable lot to his daughter. Jupiter, that he might at once punish and silence those impious clamors of the human race, presented them with the folly in place of wisdom, in which they went away perfectly well contented. From that time the greatest fools have always looked upon themselves as the wisest men. Lesson: Folly, passing with men for wisdom, makes each contented with his own share of understanding. The goose that laid the golden eggs. A certain man had a goose that laid him a golden egg every day. Being of a covetous turn, he thought if he killed his goose, he should come at once to the source of his treasure. So he killed her and cut her open, when great was his dismay to find that her inside was in no way different from that than any other goose. Lesson: Greediness overreaches itself. The Lynx and the Mole. Under the covert of a thick wood at the foot of a tree, as a lynx lay whetting his teeth and waiting for his prey, he spied a mole half buried under a hillock of her own raising. "Alas, poor creature," said the lynx, "how much I pity you! Surely Jupiter has been very unkind to debar you from the light of day which rejoices the whole creation. You are certainly not above half alive, and it would be doing you a service to make an end of you." "I thank you for your kindness," replied the mole, "but I think I have fully as much vivacity as my state and circumstances require. For the rest, I am perfectly well contented with the faculties that Jupiter has given me, who I am sure wants not our direction in distributing his gifts. I have not, 'tis true, your piercing eyes, but I have ears which answer all my purposes. Hark, for example, I am warned by a noise which I hear behind you to flee from danger." So saying, he crept into the earth, while a javelin from the arm of a hunter pierced the quick-sighted lynx to the heart. Lesson: Let none criticize nature. The Man and His Dogs. A certain man, detained by a storm in his country house, first killed all of his sheep, and then his goats, for the maintenance of his household. The storm still continuing, he was obliged to slaughter his yoke oxen for food. On seeing this, his dogs took counsel together and said, "It is time for us to be off, for if the master spare not his oxen who work for his gain, how can we expect him to spare us?" Lesson: He is not to be trusted as a friend who ill treats those on whom he depends. The Hunter, the Fox, and the Tiger. A certain hunter saw in the middle of a field a fox whose skin was so beautiful that he wished to take him alive. Having this in view, he found out his hole, and just before the entrance to it, he dug a large and deep pit, covered it with slender twigs and straw, and placed a piece of horseflesh in the middle of the covering. When he had done this, he went and hid himself in the corner out of sight, and the fox, returning to his hole and smelling the flesh, ran up to see what dainty morsel it was. When he came to the pit, he would fain have tasted the meat, but fearing some trick, he refrained from doing so, and retreated into his hole. Presently up came a hungry tiger, who, being tempted by the smell and appearance of the horseflesh, sprang in haste to seize it, and tumbled into the pit. The hunter, hearing the noise made by the tiger in falling, ran up and jumped into the pit without looking into it, never doubting that it was the fox that had fallen in. But there, to his surprise, he found the tiger, which quickly tore him in pieces and devoured him. Lesson: Look before you leap. The Spanish Cavalier. One day a quarrel about a lady happened between a Spanish cavalier and a Dutchman. Satisfaction was the word, and they met to decide the dispute. The contest was fierce and bloody, for they closed at the first encounter, and the Don, being mortally wounded, fell down and cried out to an intimate friend of his who was running to his assistance, but too late. "My good friend, for the love of heaven, be so good as to bury me before anybody strips me." Having said this, so great a quantity of blood flowed from his wound that he died immediately. Now this odd request of the Spaniard to his friend raised everybody's curiosity, as it generally happens in things prohibited, to see him divested of his clothing, especially since it was the dying request and entreaty of a worthy hero of that wise nation, who never speak at random, nor drop a word that is not full of mysteries, and each mystery full of sense, so that everyone had a great desire to know the meaning of it. And in spite of all his friend could do to prevent it, he was stripped immediately. Upon search, this spruce blade, who was completely dressed as a cavalier, and with a curious ruff about his neck worth more than all the rest of his finery, was found not to have a shirt on his back, at which the spectators could not help smiling, although the event was so pitiable. Lesson: the vain prefer honor to life. The two soldiers and the robber. Two soldiers traveling together were set upon by a robber. The one fled away, the other stood his ground and defended himself with his stout right hand. The robber being slain, the timid companion ran up and drew his sword and said, "I'll at him, and I'll take care he shall learn whom he has attacked." On this, he who had fought with the robber made answer, "I only wish that you had helped me just now, even if it had only been with those words, for I should have been the more encouraged, believing them to be true. But now put up your sword in its sheath and hold your equally useless tongue till you can deceive others who do not know you." Lesson: a coward is soon found out. The Ass and the Little Dog. The Ass, observing how great a favorite a little dog was with his master, how much caressed and fondled and fed with choice bits at every meal, and for no other reason that he could see but skipping and frisking about and wagging his tail, resolved to imitate him and see whether the same behavior would not bring him similar favors. Accordingly, the master was no sooner come home from walking and seated in his easy chair than the Ass came into the room and danced around him with many an awkward gambol. The man could not help laughing aloud at the odd sight. The joke, however, became serious when the Ass, rising on his hind legs, laid his forefeet upon his master's shoulders, and braying in his face in the most fascinating manner, would fain have jumped up into his lap. The man cried out for help, and one of his servants, running in with a good stick, laid it unmercifully on the bones of the poor Ass, who was glad to get back to his stable. Lesson: a place for everyone and everyone in his place. The Envious and the Covetous. Two men, one a covetous fellow and the other a thoroughly possessed by the passion of envy, came together to present their petitions to Jupiter. The god sent Apollo to deal with their requests. Apollo told them whatsoever should be granted to the first who asked, the other should receive double. The covetous man forbore to speak, waiting in order that he might receive twice as much as his companion. The envious man, in the spitefulness of his heart, thereupon prayed that one of his own eyes might be put out, knowing that the other would have to lose both of his. Lesson: envy shoots at another and wounds itself.